Imagine if the delivery guy was our boss. They laughed at the black delivery guy, never thinking that could happen. Who were they and why did they look down on that man? The second time they saw him, they were fired. How did he do it? And what happened to those who doubted him? Stay tuned. Like and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Jamal Bennett had been a delivery driver for Hamilton and Lowe Marketing for nearly a decade. He knew every inch of the company's high-rise office in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. Every service entrance, every back hallway, even the exact time the receptionist liked to take her coffee break. Yet, despite being a familiar face, no one really saw him. He was just another uniform, a man who came and went, ignored and invisible to the high-powered executives sipping their expensive coffee behind glass-walled offices. Jamal never let it bother him. He had always been practical. This job paid the bills, and he had never been one to dwell on the attitudes of others. But today was different. It was a routine delivery, nothing out of the ordinary. He placed a small package on the receptionist's desk and handed her the scanner. That's when he heard it. Imagine if the delivery guy was our boss. The words, laced with arrogance and mocking amusement, rang out across the open office. Jamal knew the voice instantly, Brandon Myers, a senior executive known for his sharp suits and sharper tongue. Laughter followed. A few employees chuckled under their breath, while others smirked, exchanging glances like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all day. Jamal felt the heat rise in his chest, but he didn't react. He had been through this before, brushed aside, dismissed, underestimated. This wasn't new, and yet something about this moment was different. It wasn't just a joke, it was certainty. Brandon and the others weren't laughing at a possibility, they were laughing at the impossibility of it. The idea that someone like him, a delivery guy, could ever be in charge was so absurd that it was a punchline. Jamal didn't say a word. He simply took the signed receipt, turned around, and walked toward the exit. But as he pushed open the glass doors, something caught his attention. His own reflection. The worn uniform, the faded company logo, the delivery scanner clipped to his belt. For years, he had looked at that image and accepted it. But today, for the first time, it unsettled him. Because today, he realized this wasn't all he was meant to be. Stepping out into the warm Atlanta sun, Jamal exhaled slowly. He gripped the steering wheel of his van tighter than usual. For years, he had told himself that what others thought didn't matter. But today, that belief shattered. Today, something changed. And Jamal wasn't going to ignore it. The engine of Jamal's delivery van rumbled beneath him as he sat motionless in the dimly lit parking lot outside his apartment complex. The weight of the day hung heavy on his shoulders, but it wasn't exhaustion from lifting boxes. It was something deeper. The laughter at Hamilton and Lowe had stuck with him longer than it should have. He had spent years brushing off condescending remarks, yet today, something inside him refused to let it slide. He pulled out his phone and, without thinking, dialed his older brother, Malcolm Bennett. It barely rang twice before Malcolm picked up. "Yo, little bro, what's up?" Jamal hesitated for a moment before exhaling. "Had one of those days." There was a short pause, then Malcolm let out a knowing chuckle. "Let me guess, some rich folks made sure you knew you didn't belong." Jamal rubbed his forehead. "Something like that." Malcolm's voice turned serious. "And it got to you." Jamal didn't respond right away. Finally, he admitted, "Yeah, it did." For a moment the line was silent. Then Malcolm asked the question that changed everything. "Those guys always think they're better, but the real question is, what are you going to do about it?" Jamal didn't have an answer, at least not right away, but his brother's words lingered. Malcolm had always been the hustler in the family, running his own small business and never letting anyone dictate his worth. Jamal had the same fire, but for years, He had kept it buried beneath practicality and routine. He had always been good with numbers, good with investments, flipping sneakers as a teen, later moving into stocks and small business deals. He understood strategy. He just never took the leap. And then Malcolm spoke again, repeating the words their father had told them since they were kids. People will see you one way, but only you decide who you become. Jamal clenched his jaw. Maybe it was time he decided differently. That night, instead of turning on the TV, Jamal opened his laptop. He searched for Hamilton and Lowe's financial reports, skimming through industry articles, digging into client retention rates, budget allocations, and profit margins. And that's when he found it. The cracks, the losses, the instability. Hamilton and Lowe was bleeding money, and they didn't even realize how bad it was. Jamal leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. For the first time, he saw an opportunity. And this time, he wasn't going to ignore it. Jamal sat at his small kitchen table, laptop open, eyes scanning financial reports in the dim glow of the screen. The more he dug, the clearer the picture became. Hamilton and Lowe was in trouble. On the surface, the company maintained the illusion of success, polished branding, high-profile clients, and an expensive office in the heart of Atlanta. But beneath the surface, it was a sinking ship. Jamal reviewed their client retention data. Major accounts had been pulling back. Some had quietly left, and their attempts to replace them were failing. Then came the budget mismanagement, lavish spending on unnecessary perks while ignoring critical investments in digital marketing and new strategies. And the leadership, weak. CEO Richard Langley had coasted on old money and past successes, failing to adapt to changing industry trends. Brandon Myers, the same man who mocked Jamal, had a terrible track record. Under his management, one of the firm's largest accounts had walked away, taking millions in revenue with them. They had no idea how close they were to disaster, but Jamal did. And now he had a plan. Jamal knew buying a company outright wasn't like flipping a sneaker or investing in stocks. It required strategy, patience, and leverage. Hamilton and Lowe wasn't publicly traded, but it had multiple stakeholders, former executives, early investors, and silent partners who had put money in years ago but had long since checked out. And those people, they wanted out before the company crumbled. Jamal approached them quietly, one by one. At first, they were skeptical. Why would a delivery guy be interested in buying shares of a struggling firm? But money talked, and Jamal had done his homework. He offered competitive buyouts, and one by one, they signed over their shares. It took weeks of late-night meetings and careful negotiations, but eventually, Jamal had secured a significant stake. But he needed more. That's when he turned to Terrence Coleman. Terrence Coleman was a self-made entrepreneur, a man who had built his wealth through real estate and private equity investments. Jamal had admired him for years, not just for his success, but for the way he invested in Black-owned businesses and young entrepreneurs. Convincing him, however, wouldn't be easy. They met in a private lounge in downtown Atlanta, the kind of place where serious business deals happened. Coleman studied Jamal over his glass of bourbon. "You've got my attention," he said. "Tell me why I should put my money behind you." Jamal leaned forward, confident. "Because Hamilton and Lowe isn't failing, it's being mismanaged. I know where they're losing money. I know how to turn it around. And most importantly, I know how to make it profitable again." Coleman smirked. "You sound like a man with a plan." "I don't just have a plan, I have leverage," Jamal countered. He slid a folder across the table, detailed breakdowns of Hamilton and Lowe's financial decline, the shares he had already acquired, and a roadmap to rebuilding the company. Coleman flipped through the documents, nodding slowly. After a long silence, he set the papers down and took another sip of his drink. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago," he finally said. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a check. The exact amount Jamal needed to make his final move. "You've got my backing," Coleman said. "Now go take what's yours." Jamal exhaled, gripping the check. This was it. The company that had laughed at him was about to become his. The email was simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. Subject: immediate discussion required from Jamal Bennett to Richard Langley. "Mr. Langley, I need to speak with you at your earliest convenience. This matter is urgent." Jamal hit send and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This was it. He had spent weeks meticulously executing his plan, securing shares, locking in investments, and building the leverage he needed. And now, he was ready to deliver the final blow. All that was left was to let Richard Langley know he was no longer in charge. Langley's assistant responded within an hour, scheduling the meeting for first thing the next morning. When Jamal arrived at Hamilton and Lowe's sleek headquarters, there was an unusual energy in the air. Employees bustled past him, too busy to notice him like always. But today, that was about to change. He took the elevator up to the executive floor, a place he had never been invited before. As he stepped into Langley's office, the CEO barely looked up from his desk. The arrogance was palpable. Langley smirked, leaning back in his leather chair. "What could possibly be so important, Bennett?" Jamal didn't respond immediately. Instead, he calmly walked forward and placed a thick folder on Langley's desk. The sound of it hitting the polished wood was louder than expected, making Langley's smirk falter. "You should take a look," Jamal said evenly. Langley raised an eyebrow before sighing dramatically. "Fine, let's see what's so urgent." But as soon as he flipped open the first page, his expression shifted. The color drained from his face as he skimmed the contents. It wasn't just numbers and contracts, it was proof. Jamal Bennett now owned the majority of Hamilton and Lowe. Langley's hand gripped the paper tighter as he read, his breathing shallowed. His forehead creased. This couldn't be happening. After a long silence, he finally looked up. "This is a joke," he muttered. Jamal shook his head, his voice steady. "It's very real." Langley's jaw clenched. This isn't possible. "I'm the new owner of Hamilton and Lowe," Jamal interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "You have until the end of the day to pack up and leave." Langley stared at him, disbelief and panic flickering across his face. For the first time, he had no control. Langley stood abruptly, slamming his hands onto his desk. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything I built?" he snapped. Jamal didn't flinch. "You didn't build anything. You let this company bleed while you sat here collecting a paycheck." Langley opened his mouth to argue, but he had nothing, because Jamal was right. For years, Langley had relied on the company's reputation rather than actual results. He ignored the warning signs, let good clients slip away, and never adapted. And now, it was too late. He had lost. Langley exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping as the weight of reality settled on him. Jamal had beaten him. Jamal took a step back, straightening his jacket. "You can leave quietly or you can make it ugly," he said. "But either way, you're done here." Langley had no choice but to accept it. As Jamal turned and walked out of the office, the whispers had already started. Employees glanced at him, confused, curious, but they would all know soon enough. By the end of the day, Hamilton and Lowe would never be the same again. The email hit every inbox at Hamilton and Lowe marketing first thing that morning. Subject: mandatory company-wide meeting 1000 a.m. sharp. There were no details, no explanations, just a direct summons from Jamal Bennett. At first, no one thought much of it. Some assumed it was a new policy change, Others speculated about a security briefing. Nobody expected what was about to unfold. By 9:55 a.m., employees had started gathering in the sleek, glass-walled conference room. The air buzzed with murmurs, hushed conversations about why they were all there. At 1000 a.m. sharp, Jamal walked in, and for the first time, every single person in that building actually looked at him. Jamal stood at the head of the room, calm and composed. He let his gaze sweep over the crowd, noting the mix of confusion, boredom, and mild irritation on their faces. Brandon Myers, leaning lazily against the back wall, smirked and leaned toward one of his colleagues. "What is this?" "A new delivery policy," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few people chuckled. The same type of laughter as before. Jamal didn't react. Instead, he placed a thick stack of papers on the conference table and finally spoke. "As of this morning, I am the new majority owner of Hamilton and Lowe." Silence. At first, no one moved, no one even breathed. It was like the entire room had stopped functioning for a few seconds, trying to process what they had just heard. Then someone let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're joking," Brandon scoffed, arms folded. Jamal turned his gaze toward him, his expression unchanging. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Jamal reached for the papers in front of him, flipping open the first page. "Since you're so vocal, Brandon, let's talk about why we lost our biggest client last year." Brandon's smirk faded. "Excuse me," Jamal continued as if he hadn't heard him. "You overpromised. You failed to adjust strategies. You let the market shift while you did nothing. And because of that, Hamilton and Lowe lost millions in revenue." Brandon's face reddened, his posture stiffening. "That's not—" "It is," Jamal interrupted smoothly, tapping the report, "and I have the numbers to prove it." More whispers spread across the room. Some employees exchanged glances while others straightened their backs. Brandon clenched his jaw, glaring. "You think you can just walk in here and throw your weight around?" he snapped. "You're nothing but a delivery guy." The words rang out loud and clear, hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. Jamal didn't even blink. He took a slow step forward, his voice even. "No, Brandon, I was a delivery guy, now I'm your boss." Brandon's jaw tightened. The room was deathly silent. Jamal exhaled, then shrugged. "I'm not firing you, Brandon," he smirked. "But you're welcome to leave if you don't like it." Brandon's pride was too big for anything else. He grabbed his things, straightened his tie, and turned to the door. "Fine, I quit." Jamal watched him go, then chuckled softly. "That's the first smart decision you've made in years." Jamal turned back to the room, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Now for the rest of you." He glanced at the employees, scanning their expressions. Some looked worried, others intrigued, and just a few, looked inspired. He let his next words land with precision. "Things are going to change. Some of you won't like it. Some of you won't be here for it." A few people visibly tensed. Jamal didn't stop. "If you're here to work, to build something better, you'll have a place in this company." He took a slow step forward. "But if you're here because you think you're entitled to a paycheck just for showing up." He gestured to the door. "Then you can follow Brandon." Another silence. But this time it wasn't shock. It was realization. By the time Jamal walked out of the conference room, the energy in the office had completely shifted. Some employees sat in stunned silence. Others whispered, glancing at the man they had once ignored. And for the first time in a decade, Jamal Bennett wasn't invisible anymore. He owned this company, and things were never going to be the same again. Jamal stood in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The city stretched before him, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. This moment should have felt different. For years, he had dreamed of something bigger, of proving that he was more than what people assumed. Now, he had done it. He had taken over Hamilton and Lowe, the same company that had dismissed him, ignored him, laughed at him. But as he stood there, he realized something important. This was never about revenge. If it were, he would have felt satisfied watching Brandon storm out, watching Langley's face drain of color in disbelief. But those moments didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving himself right. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Ellen Parker, Langley's former assistant, standing hesitantly at the doorway. She had worked here for 20 years, had seen CEOs come and go. But today, she looked at Jamal with something new in her eyes, curiosity, maybe even respect. "I've worked here for 2 decades," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd see this company in your hands." Jamal studied her, then offered a small smile. "Then help me make it into something worth being proud of." Jamal turned back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. Never underestimate someone because of where they start. One day they might be signing your paycheck. A new era had begun.